السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We continue inshallah ta'ala and with the tafsir of Surah Al-Balad. Surah Al-Balad, Surah Al-Balad, Surah number 90. Surah Al-Balad, Surah number 90. And that's the name of the Surah. And some would call it Surah La Uqsim. It's a Makki Surah, of course. And this is what's the correct opinion. It was said to be revealed after Surah Qaf and before Surah Al-Tariq. After Surah Qaf and before Surah Al-Tariq. And it's 20 verses. And it talks about Mecca and the time that the Prophet ﷺ spent in Mecca and the barakah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed upon the city of Mecca and the Prophet ﷺ and the prophets before. And then talks about shirk and condemning those who are upon this evil action, which is associating partners with Allah and disbelieving in the Day of Judgment. And the fact that they ignore and turn away from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed upon them from these great favors from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we'll start with the recitation of the surah first, inshallah, and recite after me, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لا أقسم بهذا البلد وأنت حل بهذا البلد ووالد وما ولد لقد خلقنا الإنسان في كبد أيحسب أن لن يقدر عليه أحد يقول أهلكت مالا لبدا أيحسب أن لم يره أحد ألم نجعل له عينين ولسانا وشفتين وهديناه النجدين فلاقتحم العقبة وما أدراك ما العقبة فك رقبة أو إطعام في يوم ذي مسغبة يتيما ذا مقربة أو مسكينا ذا متربة ثم كان من الذين آمنوا وتواصوا بالصبر وتواصوا بالمرحمة أولئك أصحاب الميمنة والذين كفروا بآياتنا هم أصحاب المشأمة عليهم نار مؤصدة لا أقسم the mad of course and then أقسم قلقلة بهذا البلد قلقلة أوسو وأنت إخفاء حل بهذا the clap here with a meme sound بهذا البلد قلقلة ووالد وما ولد إدغام with غنة and then قلقلة for the دال لقد خلقنا تو قلقلة دالا قاف لقد خلقنا الإنسان إخفاء في كبد قلقلة أيحسب أن لن the first one doesn't have غنة the second one has a غنة أيحسب أن لن يقدر عليه أحد يقول أهلكت مالا لبدا no غنة just two lambs تنوين and لام إدغام without غنة أيحسب أن لم يره أحد مد and then قلقلة ألم نجعل له عينين ولسانا وشفتين إدغام غنة وهديناه النجدين النون والشدة and then قلقلة on the جيم فلاقتحم قاف والسكون قلقلة فلاقتحم العقبة قاف ذهبي وما مد أدراك قلقلة ما العقبة فك رقبة انزو ذهاء أو إطعام make sure the كسرة is كسرة and then تنوين after إتفاء إخفاء and then في يوم another إخفاء في يوم ذي مسغبة يتيما ذا مقربة إخفاء ذا قلقلة النقاف أو مسكينا إخفاء ذا متربة تاء is light and the ra is heavy ثم كان من الذين آمنوا وتواصوا بالصبر وتواصوا بالمرحمة تواصوا the تاء is light واو is light and then you have the صاد is heavy بالمرحمة and the ra is heavy أولئك مد أصحاب الميمنة والذين كفروا بآياتنا هم أصحاب المشأمة عليهم نار مؤصدة the noon ألف is light and then you have تنوين after تميم which is إضغام with غنة مؤصدة so the first آية لا أقسم بهذا البلد and as we heard before it means I swear by this بلد or the city which is Mecca so لا أقسم means أقسم and we mentioned it before and it's used to the نفي here the حرف النفي لا the purpose of it is to make the تعظيم of what the قسم is so لا أقسم بهذا البلد he says يقسم تعالى بهذا البلد الأمين by this بلد town الأمين which is مكة الذي هو مكة المكرمة أفضل البلدان على الإطلاق the best towns whatsoever at all times خصوصا وقت حلول الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم فيها especially the time when the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام was in Mecca so لا أقسم بهذا البلد so البلد here is مكة وأنت حل بهذا البلد وأنت حل بهذا البلد which means and you are free in this city and وأنت حل بهذا البلد the word حل this is either from أحل that means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitted for the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام that means he made the people of Mecca the people of Mecca halal for whatever is the city is haram right and with that they would permit to kill you or they want to kill you and to expel you from Mecca when it's baladun haram when it's a sacred town and they know that and they believe in that so this is comes from ahalla and it comes also from al-hill which is opposite to what's when something is forbidden versus something that is permissible that means whatever the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام did whether it refers to the future when the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام would conquer Mecca back and it was made halal for him 1 hour of the day when he conquered Mecca but he doesn't mention anything in the tafsir here so وأنت حل بهذا البلد refers to the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام and whatever you did in it in that time when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed for him to conquer Mecca back, this was halal because fighting is not permissible in Mecca, but for this great purpose, for Mecca to be back to be land of al-Islam. وأنت حل بهذا البلد ووالد وما ولد. ووالد وما ولد, and walid is says and by the begetter and that which is he begot. So ووالد وما ولد. He says here, which refers to أي آدم وذريته. Adam alayhi salam and his offspring. So and the fact that this is an ayah from Allah, the ayah of Allah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that there is a walid and there is walad. There is a walid, a father, and there is offspring. And al-walid again also comes from the meaning the one that gives birth. وما walad, some even said the one that is not able to give birth. So Adam alayhi salam, some said it's Ibrahim alayhi salam and what his offsprings, because it refers to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and especially with the city of Mecca. And Ibrahim alayhi salam is the one that built the city of Mecca by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whether that refers to this. But here in the tafsir, we said Adam wa dhurriyati. The Adam and the dhurriya, the offsprings of Adam alayhi salam. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ, which means indeed, verily we have created man in toil. And this is the jawab of Al-Qasam. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ, indeed we created the human beings في كبد. Al-kabad is toil, tiredness, difficulty. And what is that related to what's mentioned before? That means, how this is something to condemn the disbelievers, and they are, as mentioned, also going to be mentioned in the verses afterwards. But here in the tafsir, he says, وَالْمُقْسَمُ عَلَيْهِ قَوْلُهُ لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. يحتمل, as we heard before, meaning that there's going to be more than one meaning here. The first one, أن المراد بذلك ما يكابده ويقاسيه من الشدائد في الدنيا. What the human beings, they go through of the toil and the difficulty and the things, the challenges that he faces in this world. وفي البرزخ, and in the transition, in the barzakh after this life before the day of Al-Qiyamah, in the grave, ويوم يقوم الأشهاد, and in the day of Al-Qiyamah when everyone will be resurrected. And that is وأنه ينبغي له أن يسعى في عمل يريحه من هذه الشدائد. If you know that this is going to be your life, that في كبد, that means in toil, in difficulty after difficulty, the difficulties in this life, the difficulty of death, in the barzakh, in the grave, and afterwards in the day of Al-Qiyamah. So therefore the person, the human being, should be diligently working in actions يريحه من هذه الشدائد, to relieve him, to make him rest from these difficulties. ويوجب له الفرح والسرور الدائم, and make him among those who are in state of joy and happiness, everlasting one. وإن لم يفعل, and if he doesn't act upon the good deeds, then فإنه لا يزال يكابد العذاب الشديد أبد الأبد. Then he will continuously forever face all kinds of difficulties and torture. This is the first meaning. So لقد خلقنا الإنسان في كبد, that means what the human beings will go through. ويحتمل أن المعنى, and the other meaning, which is also correct, that لقد خلقنا الإنسان في أحسن تقويم. We created the human beings in the best state and the best proportion ever. وأقوم خلقة. The خلقة, the creation of the human beings, was in the most perfect way. مقدر على التصرف والأعمال الشيئة, that Allah created him to be able to face difficulties. So he created him this way. ومع ذلك, and with that, this human being, فإنه لم يشكر الله. He was not grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this great favor. بل بطر بالعافية. He was ungrateful with the strength that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him. وتجبر على خالقه, and he opposed the will of his creator subhanahu wa ta'ala. فحسب بجهله وظلمه أن هذه الحال ستدوم له. So that human being, he thought with his ignorance and his wrongdoing, that this state of his, of being strong and having the means and so on, that it will be there for him forever. وأن سلطان تصرفه لا ينعزل. The sultan, the authority of his ability to do things in this life, is not going to be detached from him whatsoever. And of course, this is all wrong. So, لقد خلقنا الإنسان في كبد. Uh, so this is from al-mukabada, from mukabadat al-umur, when a person is struggling and having all kinds of difficulties to achieve things. لقد خلقنا الإنسان في كبد أيحسب أن لن يقدر عليه أحد. So what means is, thinks he that none can overcome him. This is the ignorance of the human beings. He says here in the tafsir, ويطغى, and he transgress, ويفتخر, and he has so much false pride, بما أنفق من الأموال على شهوات نفسه, for what he spends from his money to satisfy his own desires. So أيحسب ألا يقدر عليه أحد, he thinks that no one can stop him, can oppose what he has of this ignorance and this evil will. أيحسب ألا يقدر عليه أحد, meaning to take his money after he's been given that money by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or أيحسب ألا يقدر عليه أحد, that he thinks that no one will, that he would never be questioned about this wealth that he acquired. يقول أهلكت مالا لبدا, because he says أهلكت مالا لبدا, he would say boastfully, I have wasted wealth in abundance. When someone is wealthy and they have this arrogance in the way that they spend their money. So يقول أهلكت مالا لبدا, I spend so much money. أي كثيرا, بعضه فوق بعض, it's so much wealth on top of one another. وسمى الله تعالى الإنفاق في الشهوات والمعاصي إهلاكا. See the word أهلكت, that means when something is perished, something is destroyed. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used the word أهلكت in spending the money in desirable, sinful desires and things like this. He called it إهلاكا, destroyed it. Why? Because the person, the one that spent, does not benefit from what he spent. ولا يعود عليه من إنفاقه إلا الندم, and only the regret comes back to him. والخسار والتعب والقلة, tiredness, and so much work to attain the money, and then at the end of no benefit. لا كمن أنفق في مرضات الله. It is not the same like the one that would spend for the sake of Allah, seeking the pleasure of Allah, في سبيل الخير, in the matters of goodness. فإن هذا قد تاجر مع الله. That such an individual, he is have a trade with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وربح أضعاف ما أنفق, and he spent many folds of what he had spent. So this is يقول أهلكت مالا لبدا. And so this is the significance of the word أهلكت in this context, because there's no benefit he's going to get from the money. And lubada, lubad is when something is on one layer after the other. That's why he says layer after layer. So this is explains how he spent so much money, and he says it as a way of arrogance. لبدا, so much. يقول هلكت مالا لبدا أيحسب أن لم يره أحد. Does he think that none sees him? أيحسب أن لم يره أحد. He says قال الله متوعدا هذا الذي يفتخر بما أنفق في الشهوات. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, warning the one that spent his money sinfully like this, and he's boasting and he's having so much arrogant. Does he think that no one is seeing him? أيحسب في فعله هذا أن الله لا يراه. Does he think that Allah doesn't see him? ويحاسبه على الصغير والكبير, and he wouldn't be reckoned with regards to the small and the major. بل قد رآه الله, but rather Allah sees him. وحافظ عليه أعماله, and he guards his actions. ووكل به الكرام الكاتبين, and the كرام الكاتبين from the angels that are entrusted by him recording everything. لكل ما عمله من خير وشر, for everything that he did, whether it's good or evil. So whether this is in this dunya, in the hereafter, both. So ألم نجعل له عينين, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, have we not made for him a pair of eyes? So this is again the He's ghafil, he's forgetful, he's turning away from the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that gave him what he has as means for him to attain the wealth. ثم قرره بنعمه, as he says. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala confirmed these favors for him to say, yes, this is from Allah. ألم نجعل له عينين ولسانا وشفتين, and tongue and two lips. للجمال والبصر والنطق, for the beauty, for the ability to see, for uttering words. وغير ذلك من المنافع الضرورية فيها, and other than that, from the mandatory, the obligatory, or the necessities of benefits. These are the favors of this dunya, right? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the eyes. So therefore, look with your eyes to what Allah permitted. And if you see, as Ibn Kathir rahimahullah, he says in his tafsir, beautiful statement saying that أَلَمْ نَجْعَلْ لَهُ عَيْنَيْن, didn't we give him eyes? And these eyes are tests from Allah, to look with your eyes to what Allah permitted for you. And if you see something that Allah forbade for you, فَأَطْبِقْ عَلَيْهِمَا غِطَاءَهُمَا, Allah gave you the ability to close your eyes. So close your eyes, lower your gaze, shut your eyes, like you close the door, you shut your eyes from seeing what's haram. It's not like the ears where you have to remove yourself from the place, or you can just, and this is an ayah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, أَلَمْ نَجْعَلْ لَهُ عَيْنَيْن وَلِسَانًا وَشَفَتَيْن, وَلِسَانًا, a tongue to speak, to express what's inside of him, وَشَفَتَيْن, and this is another ayah from Allah, and the benefits of the lips, that a person is able to speak, using it to speak and to utter some letters and to eat food, and beauty to one's face. So all of these things are from the favors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they turn around and they turn away and they ignore it. And وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجِدَيْن, and shown him the two ways, good and evil. وَهَدَيْنَاهُ, هَدَيْنَاهُ, we guided him. So this hidayah is the hidayah of al-bayan, the hidayah of showing. The messengers are being sent, the books have been revealed. And Najdain, and Najd, the Najd, what they call Najd, like the area of Al-Iraq and things like this. And Najd is the place or the land that is higher above the sea level. And it's not like the mountains, but higher land. So, وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجِدَيْن. And Najdain, the two Najd. Basically, it refers to the two paths, right? And here refers to the two paths of good and evil. And it's mentioned as Najdain, Najd, because it's higher thing. That means it's something that would have difficulties in taking it. It requires effort, right? Like they would, when they walk onto a Najd or something that is higher in its place. He says, ثُمَّ قَالَ فِي نِعَمِ الدِّينِ. So this is mentioning the favor of the deen. وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ أي طريقي الخير والشر, the two paths of good and evil. بَيَّنَّ لَهُ الْهُدَى مِنَ الضَّلَالِ, we made it clear to him the guidance from misguidance. وَالرُّشْدِ مِنَ الْغَيِّ, and what is upright from what is evil. فهذه المنن الجزيلة, is great minan, favors from Allah. تقتضي, comes or brings by necessity, from al-abd, from the slave of Allah, أن يقوم بحقوق الله, that he would be upon the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fulfilling them. ويشكر الله على نعمه, and to be grateful to Allah for the favors of Allah. وألا يستعين بها على معاصيه, and that he does not seek help by these favors of Allah to disobey Allah. ولكن هذا الإنسان لم يفعل ذلك, but this human being did not do that. So these favors, this is, as you mentioned here in the tafsir, what ought to be done with the favors of Allah. That a person acknowledges that this is from Allah, so he fulfilled the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with these favors of Allah by being grateful to Allah, and not to use it to commit sins and to spread corruption on the face of earth. So وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجِدَيْن, and many different things I mentioned about an-najdain, but this is the most frequent one, is the two paths of goodness or evil. So then فَلَا قُتَحَمَ الْعَقَبَةِ, which means but he has made no effort to pass on the path that is steep. فَلَا قُتَحَمَ الْعَقَبَةِ, here this is after when يقول أهلكت مالا لبدا and so on. That means, shouldn't he then get into this aqaba, into this steep, into this barrier that requires effort for a person to do. And he says here in the tafsir, أي لم يقتحمها ويعبر عليه. He did not get into it. He did not go over it. لأنه متبع لشهواته, because he follows his desire. So العقبة وما أدراك ما العقبة. Right. So al-aqaba here, al-aqaba usually is a word that is used for something that is a barrier in one's path. So a person has to go through it. There's no way around it whatsoever. And this is, some said it's a mountain in Jahannam and things like this. So a person has to overcome this aqaba or this difficulty. So, and also as falaqatahama, that means should he then enter al-aqaba, which is, as they said, a mountain in Jahannam, as a result of their evil actions. And this is one meaning. And the other meaning that he mentions in the tafsir here, لم يقتحمها ويعبر عليها. So he did not go through the difficult matters that requires, for someone to be steadfast upon the deen of Allah. It requires that he's patient, that he go against his desires. And that's why it's described by the actions done afterwards, because he follows his desires, so he would not do the things that are mentioned afterwards. That's why it says, وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْعَقَبَةِ. What do you know about al-aqaba? He said, فَكُّ رَقَبَةٍ. The first one, فَكُّ رَقَبَةٍ, which means to free a slave. فَكُّ رَقَبَةٍ. And as he said here, تخليصها من الرق والعبودية. When رقبة is the neck, and it refers to the slave when it's revealed or relieved from slavery. So this is the path. If you want to seek salvation, if you want to save yourself from the hellfire, and it's aqaba, that means it's a difficult thing, because it requires for you not to be greedy. Either you spend the money on your own desires and that's it, or to have a portion of your money that you would help the needy and the poor and so on, and one of which is to free slaves. So freeing slaves is such a great deed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encouraged the people to spend from their money to free the slaves, so those who are enslaved by others. And the many hadith that talks about how this is such a great deed, and the early generations of Islam, they would do that to free themselves from the hellfire. So فَفَكُّ رَقَبَةٍ أَوْ إِطْعَامٌ فِي يَوْمٍ ذِي مَسْغَبَةٍ, or giving food in a day of hunger. Giving food in a day of hunger. أو إطعام. So as he says here, أي مجاعة شديدة. مزغبة is مجاعة famine. بأن يطعم وقت الحاجة أشد الناس حاجة. That he would feed the people when it's the most time of need. He would give the people those who would need the most. So, and this is the مزغبة. The day is the مزغبة, and we talked about the and that. That means it's upon al-mazghaba. Al-mazghaba is the hunger. The hunger that is an extreme one, right? So this is like the famine type of a thing. Yatiman ذا مقربة, to give it to the yatim, an orphan, the one that lost his father when he's young. ذا مقربة, that means he is a relative. And there, like the and so on, that means he's a relative close to one. So that جامعا بين كون يتيما فقيرا ذا قرابة. More and more rewards, because he is yatim, and he is faqir, he's in need, and he is relative. And relatives, they have more rights than those who are further away. So as the hadith, الصدقة على المسكين صدقة. You give charity on the miskin, that's صدقة, that's charity. وعلى ذي الرحم اثنتان. And if he has rahim, relations of kin and kith, that's two rewards. صدقة وصلة. That it's صدقة, charity, and صلة, and a way of connecting the relationship between those who are relatives. يتيما ذا مقربة أو مسكينا ذا متربة, or miskin, poor, afflicted with misery. And as he said here, أي قد لزق بالتراب من الحاجة والضرورة, that he is attached to the dust. This is the matraba, from a dust. That means he's miskin, he's calm, he's not moving too much because he's poor, and he's been attached to the turab, matraba, from the turab because of the dire need. Different than those who have lots of money, they move around, they have this lofty way of and style of things. So whether it's again he is like that with the sign of poverty, or he's a stranger not in his land, and things like this. ثم كان من الذين آمنوا وتواصوا بالصبر وتواصوا بالمرحمة. Then he became one of those who believed and recommended one another to perseverance and patience, and also recommended one another to pity and compassion. So ثم كان من الذين آمنوا. So as he said here, I believed with their hearts بما يجب الإيمان به, with what required for them to believe in, وعملوا الصالحات, and they did righteous good deeds with their physical actions, من كل قول وفعل واجب أو مستحب, any speech or actions obligatory, recommended. وتواصوا بالصبر, and they enticed one another, encouraged one another to be patient. على طاعة الله وعن معصيته. We talked about that before. They would help one another, they would advise one another, be patient. Be patiently upon the obedience of Allah, and be patient away from his sins, and be patient when it comes to the aqdar, the qadar, that you would have some pain as a result of it. بأن يحث بعضهم بعضا على الانقياد لذلك والإتيان به كاملا منشرحا به الصدر, and to be upon it with spaciousness in one's heart, مطمئنة به النفس, in state of tranquility. وتواصوا بالمرحمة, and they also تواصوا from encouraging one another, advising one another with al-marhama. Al-marhama is to have mercy towards other creation of Allah by as ولا يحض على طعام المسكين, as mentioned in Surah Al-Fajr, encouraging one another to give the poor, تعليم جاهلهم, teach those who are ignorant, fulfill the rights of others, giving them whatever they need, ومساعدتهم على المصالح الدينية والدنيوية, matters of religious matters, worldly matters, وأن يحب لهم ما يحب لنفسه ويكره لهم ما يكره نفسه, and that he loves for them what he loves for himself, and he hates for them what he hates for himself. أولئك أصحاب الميمنة, they are the people of al-maymana, those who on the right hand, the dwellers of Jannah, those who applied these characteristics. الذين وفقهم الله لاقتحام هذه العقبة, the ones that Allah guided them to overcome this difficulty by having this generosity of goodness. أولئك أصحاب الميمنة, they are the people of the right side, because they did what they did from the rights of Allah and the rights of the creation of Allah. وتركوا ما نهوا عنه, and they left what Allah forbade them from. وهذا عنوان السعادة وعلامتها. This is the title of happiness, is to fulfill the rights of Allah, the rights of the human beings, and this is the signs of someone that is being among the people of happiness as a result of the outcome of things. On the other side, وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا بِآيَاتِنَا هُمْ أَصْحَابُ الْمَشْأَمَةِ, but those who disbelieved in our ayat, they are those on the left hand, the dwellers of the fire. كفروا بآياتنا نبذوا هذه, they turned away from these things, they threw it behind their backs. فلم يصدقوا بالله, they did not believe in Allah. ولا آمنوا به ولا عملوا صالحا, they did not do righteous good deeds, because the righteous good deeds has to be based on al-iman billah, otherwise it's not righteous good deeds. ولا رحموا عباد الله, and they did not have any mercy towards the slaves of Allah. So as a result of that, هم أصحاب المشأمة, they are the people that would receive their books with the left hand. عليهم نار مؤصدة, which means upon them the fire will be shut over them. عليهم نار مؤصدة أي مغلقة. مؤصدة, that means it's shut down. في عمد ممددة, in عمد ممددة, that means and in shut down without any opening. في عمد ممددة عليهم نار مؤصدة في عمد ممددة. عليهم نار مؤصدة, مؤصدة is shut down. في عمد ممددة قد مدت من ورائها لئلا تنفتح أبوابها. The gate, the old style of gates where when a door or a big gate is closed, you have this type of a lock that you would have it comes down so that nobody is able to open it from inside. حتى يكونوا في ضيق وهم وشدة. So this is مؤصدة, shut down. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will punish them for them to be upon this evil actions that they were upon. عليهم نار مؤصدة, as it's mentioned في عمد ممددة, another surah. So this is with regards to Surah Al-Balad, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed it to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, as we heard. So swearing by the city of Mecca, and some of the ayat of Allah showing the reality of the human being so that people understand how their life is, right? في كبد, and the only way to relieve oneself from these difficulties is by fulfilling the deen of Allah and the different aspects of things, the rights of Allah, the rights of the human beings, and the arrogance of the human beings, turning away from the truth, turning away, thinking that nobody sees them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not watching them, reminding them of the favors of Allah, and then the subject of Al-Aqaba. When you have a way to go and there's a mountain right on your path, and there's no way around it. You have to climb this mountain. And this is basically, this aqaba is this nafs, one's self. You have to get over your own greed. There's no way around. There's no easy route. A person has to overcome his own greed, right? Is that a difficult thing? Yes, of course. Is it in the capacity of the human beings? Yes. It is not physically challenging. It's all within one's own self. To overcome the greed of oneself. That's why freeing the slave, feeding those, and of course, if someone doesn't have anything to feed the poor with, then he is not to be blamed. So that's why, but the one that has, and he would get it out from his own self. This is again a sign of goodness, and that requires that struggle within oneself. And how the believers, when these things are difficulty like that for one nafs, they encourage one another, they remind one another, and make by at-tawasi, by making sure that it's not just reminded one time, but they keep on making it easy for each other, to make it easy for them to be patient, to make it easy for them to have mercy towards others. And these are the people of Jannah. Otherwise, look at the life of the disbelievers, just desires after desires, and therefore they end up being in the hellfire. Billah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from the evil within our own selves, and to make us among those who overcome these aqaba. And you see the relationship between the aqaba, this difficulty, this barrier, and لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. So the kabad is no way to remove it. So the only way is, as we heard, to make it easy for oneself by being obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us benefit, and we'll stop here. I know it's past the time of sunrise, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept. If you have any questions or anything that is not clear, please go ahead. The attendance code, inshallah, is Al-Balad. Al-Balad, whether it's in Arabic or in English. Al-Balad. There's a question here. Can you advise us on dealing with the harm that comes from other humans, and how to be patient when a friend or a family member transgresses upon your right? Wallahi, we are fitna to one another. We are a trial to one another as human beings. So that's, as we heard in the surah, is to remind one another, and to be kind, and having that generosity in which a person is patient with one another, to remind one another to be patient, to remind one another to have mercy, and to seek excuses for people, especially if it's someone that is a friend or a family member. 9/10 of the good manners is to be upon at-taghaful, is to overcome and to seek excuses for them, and to remind them for their own benefit, first and foremost, and to leave whatever is one's self, to leave that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And life goes on, as they say. We have to deal with things. This is how life is, to have that strength. You see, the surah is a life changing, like all the surahs. When people turn away from the Quran, they become so weak mentally and physically. Mentally is, even in relationships, you won't find spouses, for example. A man, his wife is giving him a hard time. The wife, her husband is giving a hard time. With all due respect, deal with it. Be patient. Life is not this is not the ultimate joy to be established. This is the life of struggle. So be patient, as long as patience is the right thing to do, to establish the deen of Allah, and to be patient, and to encourage, and to advise, and to overcome, to overlook one's rights sometimes for a good benefit, for a period of time, for the hope of things to change. Things like this. Not from the first instant that once a person is challenged to something, that means a person would collapse, for example. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us, inshallah. طيب, we'll stop here, inshallah. And tonight, inshallah ta'ala, we'll continue. Any more questions? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for each and every one of us, inshallah. بارك الله فيكم، وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.